Howdy y'all, get the Bulldog on the channel. I'm working on this thing here and I figured I'd show you the difference between an intake with a dry well and an intake with a wet well. An example of a dry well would be like a 7.3 Power Stroke. Now what they have on those things, they have a high pressure oil pump that sets in the valley, which is hooked to high pressure oil lines that run up to each side of the head with high pressure oil fittings on them. You've got on the back of it a turbo with high pressure oil pumping up through it, and in the middle of that you've got your fuel filter housing with low pressure fuel pumping into it and around. So you have a ton of leak points in the valley of your motor that can pump flammable liquid on top of a hot motor. They don't want a huge amount because that thing, the valley is going to be that deep, 3-4 inches deep. Well, that's 3-4 inches deep of flammable liquid before it can go anywhere. So what they did is in the back of the valley, they don't want it coming out the front because then they're painting the front of the block. In the back of the valley, they drilled a hole and it just puts this liquid into the bell housing, which is just an annoyance, a huge annoyance on an automatic, but it is, a bad thing on a manual because you've got your clutch back there. You can make your clutch slip if you have a big leak. And here's the horrible part about that. What's leaking? I mean, they usually have some oil up the top, and it does not get rid of all of the oil. That hole is about that much taller than everything else. So you would have that much up in the block before it could pour out over that hole. So you can't tell what's leaking. But I see why they did it. So they get rid of most of your flammable liquid, and it's not just filling up cavity that deep, dumping it everywhere when you slam on your brakes or take off real fast or take a corner hard. I see why. Here we have an example of a wet well. This is a Chrysler, and some years ago they started putting the oil filter right here in front of the motor. And when they did that, they put the oil cooler right in here in the valley. And as you can see here, that oil, if there's a leak of some kind, that's got to get pretty deep before it can get out. And you see it's kind of wet down there. Well, I've been spraying brake cleaner in there and using our apparatus. That's the vacuum pump we used to use for AC systems. It's old, it's not much good, it doesn't pump very well. And then an old R12 tank that we had a valve welded into. We just stick a deal on that, and that way that whole tank is a vacuum can. The vacuum pump pumps out of the top of the can, and it turns this line here into a vacuum. And we vacuum liquids with that, so that we're not ruining a vacuum sweeper or anything like that. But you can see where it's kind of clean. That's how deep the stuff was. I mean, it was clear over top of those knock sensors. Those knock sensors control the ignition timing, keeps the engine from pinging, tells the computer, if it senses pre-ignition. And it was clear up over them. It was as deep as it could get. And then when you make, on this car, you can make the hardest left turn you can and you're not going to get any oil out. But you make just a little bit of a right turn and it's going to pour oil out the end of that deal. And Chryslers have started putting covers over top of the bottom of the engine. So you don't see it, I guess, I don't know. But it's fabric, and I have seen them. They'll absorb a huge amount of oil, and they'll get so heavy they'll just finally fall off. So, I mean, you don't notice the oil leak until it's horrible. Every time you change oil on them, you dump a little bit of oil down in that valley, it can't get away. You know, it's a pet peeve. I've got this off now because the oil cooler has been leaking. They're plastic. They warp. They'll leak a little bit out the bottom. And it is horrible trying to find them because you can't hardly clean it out. I mean, you set the car at an angle and spray in there and blow air, and you just keep blowing it out the other side. And then run it to make sure that that's what's leaking. This one's bad. But I'm going to clean a little bit more on this and see if I can get it back together. Just wanted to show you, one of the problems that we run into between a dry well and a wet well. The 4 cylinders, they have a wet well in them. That's where the spark plugs go down in. They'll put all the spark plugs down in the middle between the 2 cams, double cam engine, and that thing will fill clear up with oil. It's horrible. But, it is what they do. Like, comment, subscribe, hit your little bell notification, share it around, and we'll talk to you later.